Hey, Chair Moss, I don't see Chair Huntsman yet, but you do have a quorum, so of committee members. So the other
Let
the
me
other
just,
okay,
let's see.
no rush, sir. I'm just saying. I don't know if he's planning on coming in or not, Chair Huntsman.
I saw that he was. I know he has a
Oh,
client call at 10:50.
right. Okay.
He may have clicked the Teams button. I did that too. The
Yeah.
invite had a join Teams.
Yeah. Oh, he's on his way over. He did. Yeah. He's on.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
gotcha.
Hey, I made it.
There we are.
Okay, I'll mute.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to summer. Welcome to finance. Deputy Jones, I'll turn the reins to you.
Hey, if we could pull the agenda up, Cami. So we'll start with your direction, Chair Moss, with item 2.1. This is an information item. We're going to do some recognition of progress, achievements, or improvements.
Thank you, sir.
So just to make sure, with the process related to the PMR. So I'll just start with that one, if that's okay. We do a more deeper presentation of the monthly report for USIMS on a quarterly basis. The next deep dive is in August. We plan on it for the August meeting, but I'll just pause here. Chair Moss, for any questions from you or any members of the committee on the USIMS project itself, or any updates that you would like pending, the deeper dive in August.
It would be, I guess, maybe just good, a brief high level report on, progress items and items of concern between now and August, if you could.
Yeah, well, with that, I mean, my biggest concern right now is we continue to have challenges or struggles with both hiring and retaining programmers or information technology personnel. So much so that I am going to work with because and Katrina or Jared can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way the process works right now is we are working with a vendor to supply us those personnel, those key personnel or critical personnel for the 3 modules. But essentially, just because the market is that way, it is difficult for even them to provide us, updated, personnel to take a look at, right? So we've even tried to go into hiring additional or excess personnel. So like if we need 1 programmer for a particular module, we try to hire 2. But the skill sets and things are just so in demand right now, it's really hard even to do that. So my point is that, and I think this will help things, or be able to see if we can get a vendor that through an RFP process, see if we can get a vendor that the vendor themselves will help us program the system. That way they bring their own, personnel to it as well. So I'll be working on a draft RFP with Jared, Katrina, just to see if we can open it up to other vendors that, might be able to provide a whole team rather than just working with a vendor that, provides us one eaches, so to speak. So not sure how that's going to go. But, we're very vested in this. Obviously, we do want to accelerate and make sure we meet the timelines. It was very gracious of the legislature to extend the full operational capability deadline from July 1st of 2023 to 2024. In addition to that, just as an update, we have selected the vendors that LEAs can use to upgrade their systems. We'll be convening representation from business administrators. That there's that 4 million that was appropriated of one-time money, Representative Ballard's bill. And I want to make sure everybody's clear that that's not money for USIMS itself. That's money to provide to LEAs that need that additional funding to get into better systems or to upgrade their current systems. So I'll be sending a message to Robert Peterson, is the president of UASBO right now. He's the Weber School District BA. I'll be sending him an email asking him to see if we can get 2 BAs from districts. We'll also ask for 2 business officials / administrators from charter schools, and then select other personnel and convene and work on getting that money distributed and getting money, getting better systems out there for our LEAs. Just want to make sure that that I'm clear that that $4 million, it's much appreciated, but right now, just cost alone, we're looking at that $4 million. It'll help. It definitely will help. I don't want to disparage that at all, but it's really, there's going to be needed a lot more funding to help LEAs with financial system. I mean, it is what it is. As we know, rural districts, smaller charter schools, they just don't have the economies of scale of like an Alpine or a Park City to invest funding in systems. So we're going to help that, meet the intent. And so that's in the near term here as well. Because as there's the 3 components of USIMS: educator, student, and financial module. We got started a little bit late on the financial module, but it's all integrated and part of the process. So those are the 2 big lifts going on right now, in addition to the continued operations of the teams, those respective module teams, if you will. I will pause and see if you or any of the committee members have any questions or concerns at this point, sir.
Thank you. I see a couple hands. Maybe just a quick follow up on what you said about the $4 million. I think that was appropriated in 21, right? Initially?
Yes, sir. I think it was in the 21 session. Deborah probably can correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, it came out of the 21 session.
Have LEAs, kind of reported on their plans to use the funding, or are we still waiting for that component of trying to know what kind of logistical barriers they're going to face? I know we got 141 LEAs or whatever that number is. Yeah. Since the money was allocated, have we heard from them about who's ready to go and who's not, and what might stand in their way other than funding?
Right. The first step to that, just real quick, sir, was to do what we've completed now, which is to get do the RFP process, so we can identify what amounts to cooperative contracts with multiple vendors that LEAs can choose from. So that took some time, too long. I own that. It was, but we have arrived at that point where now, by convening representation that I mentioned before, we can start to drill down on those particular questions that you got. Because the biggest question out there right now is, what does right look like in a financial system? Well, there's many good examples out there, right? You've got Park City, you've got Alpine, recently APA converted to NetSuite. That's been beneficial to them too. So kudos to them for moving their operations into a better system. So ultimately, what's going to happen, sir, is when we convene these representatives, to basically set the criteria for identifying which LEAs are in the most need for, or have the greatest need for either upgrades or whole new financial systems. That's going to be the key. And we're looking at probably having our first meeting this month. So
got it. Cool.
I anticipate it'll accelerate. So sorry for the long answer. To answer your question.
Thank you. Very informative. Thank you. Vice Chair Norton, and then Member Hart, Member Hutchins.
Yes, and this builds off of what you just asked, Chair Moss. Deputy Superintendent Jones, do you have a feel for how many of our LEAs currently have a system that would be adequate, or are any of them adequate?
Yeah, Chair Moss, if I may.
Please.
Now, I based this on when we first, came up and did estimates for what it would cost to upgrade or put LEAs in there. About a third So we're looking at 156 LEAs. About a third of those, I feel strongly, could represent or have systems that likely would need much money or much influx, right? Now, again, most of those are in your bigger, more economies of scale type LEAs. We'll certainly look at that again, though. I mean, the data I'm using to answer this question is 2 to 3 years old now. So, 2-3 years later, I don't think much has changed. The second tier, second third of them have systems that really would probably require just minimal upgrades, right? Like maybe, for instance, funding the capability of having, interoperability with the payroll system they use, or, a procurement module or something like that. Then the other third of the LEAs definitely need either whole new, transition to systems, or in the systems that just simply are very, very time consuming or difficult. I never disparage any particular vendor, never would do that. But based on, the reporting requirements, things they have to do, they have to, extrapolate or download sheets and then send those in. So my response to that question, Chair Moss, is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Roughly.
Very helpful.
Okay.
Member Hart and Member Hudson.
How many companies or organizations did you identify with the RFP for districts to choose from?
That is a good question. I want to say we landed on about 5 to 6. If Adam's in here, I'm not sure if Adam Hurd's with us, our procurement director, but he probably knows the exact number. But it was at least 5. I mean, I can name them off the top of my head, but so there'll be so, and a few of them are actually vendors that are already providing systems to some of our LEAs. So
like Skyward kind of things?
Yes.
So are you comfortable with, are you at all concerned about the capacity of those 5 to slow down the process at all? Do you wish there would have been more? Are you at all worried that they won't be able to handle the need, or any thoughts there? I'm just looking for pain points
Sure. Yeah.
in the process.
Chair Moss, if I may, I'm very going into, assembling the state, the representation to come up with the criteria and get the $4 million out. I'm very comfortable with who, what vendors make up those cooperative contracts, because the language or the intent of the bill is they don't, LEAs don't necessarily have to use those.
Right.
There's still opportunity, so you have other systems out there like Alio, QuickBooks, things like that. The key is the interoperability of their system to USIMS, which in itself is a challenge because of the timing. Here we are, parallel process. We're trying to get LEAs into better systems, so that it'll interoperate. And then we're programming USIMS, but we have programmer challenges, right? So the question is, well, when can we start testing, that interoperability, and so that, we can select the right vendor, either from cooperative or existing, or, things like that. So short answer is I'm comfortable with where we're at. Sure, would I've liked to have seen more responses? There were additional vendors that we did eliminate because we couldn't, we had quite a good panel of individuals to look at the vendors that did submit. So yes, ma'am, I'm pretty comfortable with the opportunities for selection that the LEAs will have out there. So
Chair, I have another. Can I quickly ask
Sure.
another? Are the LEAs, I think I know the answer. I just want a little bit more detail. Are the LEAs aware of the costs associated or the need, or do they know what's coming in terms of cost? Have they been able to work it into their budgets, or is it an unknown that they're going to have to figure out as information becomes available, as the vendors working with them, or is it like a known cost that they have been able to plan for?
right. So I think the answer to that is it varies on how much or how much detail LEA by LEA has on what it would cost either to move completely out of their system, to upgrade their system, do that. Because there are LEAs that are currently in a particular system right now that I have heard are looking to get out of that system completely. So in that case, I would anticipate that they're probably a little further ahead than their peers in what that would cost them. I'm not sure if they're looking at programming their own system, i.e. like a Davis or Weber County School District, or if they're looking at other vendors, things like that. But I just think it's going to vary in how much right now or point. So the key is that we'll make sure we don't want to rush the failure. So, I'll make sure that I'm clear with this group we're convening, this work group, that, we need to give time or allow time for, whatever criteria we use is to allow them to do their estimates and to see what's most beneficial to them. There are districts that have a particular system at the district level, but then in the schools, they're in something like QuickBooks, right? I think you're probably familiar with that. So those types of, do we have the details of what it would cost to put everyone in the same system? Or when I say everyone, their schools in the same system, is that? I think in some cases, yes, but not entirely, no, not across the whole state, say, for instance. And then also keep in mind too, along the lines of this question is that we have charter schools, as I know you don't need to keep this in mind because you already know this, that are managed by, companies, say like, Academica West has 20 plus charter schools and they're all in the same financial system. And they have a good one that, Academica West does a really good job of managing their charter schools with their financial system. So, I wouldn't anticipate much cost to them, for those 20 plus schools to do that. But I'm sure that, if they don't know, then they could quickly determine how much cost they'd be looking at to get to interoperability with USIMS. So
My concern is that we get to the end of the road and we've got LEAs that don't have the resources to get what they want. So thanks for that information.
Yeah.
I see Member Hutchins.
Yeah, just hopefully this is more of a maybe provide more information in your presentation in August. I know, and I'm thinking more of communication through Aspire. And I know many schools have relied on particularly the email system in Aspire to communicate with students and parents. And the look and feel has never been great. We've always wanted it to look better. But this last year, we've had a lot of challenges with that email system not working through Aspire. And what I've been told is that the schools are being told that the Aspire, the student information system, really isn't supposed to be used as an email system, and encouraging schools to find other platforms to use. And so I'm just curious, is that real as far as, when we're looking at Aspire and the communication element? Is that something that's going to be phased out? Is that something that's not going to exist? Is that something that's going to be improved and schools can rely on it? One of my main concerns about not using Aspire as a way to communicate with families is the data security, because then schools are having to go find third parties and other platforms in order to maintain communication with parents and students, and sometimes about sensitive issues. And schools have relied on Aspire at times because that is the system that has all the student information and has the security for student information. And if we're being told we're phasing this out and we don't want you to use it for communication anymore, schools have already started to, and many schools are looking into having to find third-party vendors to be able to efficiently provide that communication. And so I would just in your August presentation, if it falls into line with the scope of what you're going to present, maybe an update on that in particular.
Yes, so Chair Moss, if I may, just real quick, so
Yes,
we'll,
please.
we'll certainly expand or address this question in more detail in August. My direction or my guidance to all of the USIMS stakeholders and the product owner, who's Katrina, and Jared Feld, our IT director, is that we want to make sure that not only are LEA systems compatible with USIMS, but internally USIMS is interoperable across the educator student information system thing, and ease of use is up there as the highest priority for whomever has access to whichever modules at any given time. So we'll certainly address that. But yeah, that makes sense to me, that it's being communicated that we'll phase that out. But at the same time, we are really going to try to do our level best to provide as much resource within this system as possible in one place to them across those three modules. So right now, there's the three teams, but Katrina does a really good job of capturing all of the ancillary processes like you just described, so that we do get to the point of saying, well, are we creating redundancy here, or are we creating efficiency here, by having a communication system, or things like that. So yeah, we'll definitely drill down on that further. But Director Feld also has his hand raised. So
Yes,
Jared.
please, Jared.
Yeah, if it's okay. Jared Felt, USBE IT Director. So the Aspire communications that you're talking about is separate from USIM. So it's a standalone product. The board previously, when we, and this was kind of the time I came on, and Scott can probably elaborate a little more, they asked us not to expand the Aspire program because of some of the issues with competitors. We're offering a free product to the field, but competitors, there was a competition thing going on there, and so right now we're fixing critical issues and upgrading a little bit, but to expand out the communications piece, that would probably have to come back to the board to get that approved, because the board, like I said previously, asked us not to expand the capabilities of that program. So Deputy Jones, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from board members? Chair Huntsman or anybody else? We're looking forward to the deep dive in August. So thank you for, this is a tough one. I reviewed the slide materials and noticed 19 of 29 positions filled. That's a challenge. So I know we're scrambling and moving forward as fast as we can. My pipe dream of having WizKid college apprentices do some of this work was a Hail Mary at one point. It's a tough, broader question. There's good people out there, but there's a lot of reasons we can't get them, and so we all appreciate the work that's going into filling those spots. Well, thank you. I think that concludes, unless there are any other comments or questions.
That does conclude the USIMS piece. There's a couple other or some other recognition that we'd like to give, sir, within this.
Thank you. You bet.
So recently we were, so each quarter, the Division of Finance performs audits on our agency's disbursements. So the last one was for the quarter that was October 2021 through December of 2021. They received a sample of disbursements, and I'm pleased to report and recognize all of our great staff within financial operations that had zero findings. You can see that the disbursement sample for USB included 27 transactions comprised of, they sample our transactions. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of transactions over a quarter that can take place. But they sampled 27 transactions comprised of 11 finance, 16 purchase card, and 3 purchasing cards, or from 3 purchasing card statements, and found no exceptions. So this is just demonstrated of the fact that even with turnover and attrition in our ranks within financial operations, we continue to train well, and we can continue to emphasize the importance of, proper coding, proper transaction, and really what amounts to effective control and management of the funds within your budget, within the office operations. So I just want to take the opportunity to recognize all of the staff that contribute to these findings quarter after quarter. We've had other quarters where they may have a minor finding or a moderate finding, but they're typically one eaches in there. But we've had more quarters than within the last 2-3 years here where we have 0 findings. So we just wanted to take the opportunity to recognize staff for that. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Superintendent Jones. And I see Vice Chair Norton's hand up. I just want to share my appreciation. There's a lot of things that hit the headlines. Much of our finance job is making sure things aren't in the headlines. They just run the way they're supposed to. And we know how huge a task that is, how complex our system is. So yeah, kudos to everybody, and thank you for that great work of being on top of so many moving pieces. Vice Chair Norton.
I just wanted to congratulate you and your staff as well. To have 0 findings is quite a rarity in finance these days, and that is just outstanding work. I'm a little bit overwhelmed, actually, because you think of all the moving parts and all the people that had to be educated properly in how to use their cards, or how to provide information, and the hard work and the finite detail that your people have attended to is just amazing. So congratulations and big, big, big thanks.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so Cami, is there one other one? Yes. So is Sarah here with us? Cami, for this one? Do you know?
I don't see her on.
Okay, I'll take it then. This is really important too. We want to recognize that our ARP ESSER plan, that you, the board, put together and approved. I mean, obviously staff, gave you those recommendations on the plan. That revision to the plan, though, too, was reviewed by the U.S. Department of Education, and they accepted it on May 11th, 2022. Why this is such a big deal, or why this is important, is because it sets conditions for favorable outcomes when we do get monitored or audited, that, by beginning right, will end right with the, ESSER funds that, I mean, as you know, just, millions of dollars of ESSER funds. So, it's just a great reflection on all of the staff that, Sarah's leadership, Sarah Harward, and the great staff that are helping run ARP and ESSER grant. It's across our whole enterprise, but the plan that you put forward as the board, and having it accepted at that level, again, sets really great conditions, for favorable outcomes, not only in the expenditures, as they're targeted, right? For instance, the academic inputs of lost instructional time, summer learning and enrichment programs, comprehensive after-school programs. But, from my vantage point as a comptroller, the conditions that are set with that plan and the expenditures and proper coding by the LEAs will make a big difference in our control and management of those funds. So kudos to the team there.
Thank you. And the DOE's press release I was reviewing was highly complimentary, and it pointed out, like you said, that the USBE developed a comprehensive plan for determining the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on student learning, including the identification of relevant data sources and opportunity to learn questions. And that's a difficult process. Everybody here knows I'm not a huge fan of federal strings and oversight and regulations, but the money was there. We met the conditions. Our staff, as we saw for months and months, was putting together a great plan, communicating with LEAs. So it's great to see that approval pay off. And I think we all look forward to seeing what's, the outcomes of this unprecedented expenditure. We're going to learn some great things. We weren't planning on it, but we're going to learn some great things from the money that was invested. And to Superintendent Jones's point, the coding and knowing how this is used and then eventually what the effects are, I think are going to be something we can use to evaluate, programs and priorities. It's a huge unplanned experiment, but it took a lot of effort to get it approved, and we're off and running. Vice Chair Norton?
Yes, and in the spirit of the NBA basketball finals, we are in the Michael Jordan category. So when they look upon us, they know that this is an elite group, and they know that we do things right. And I like it when we are known for doing things right.
Amen.
Agree.
Who's that? Did he play back in the 80s or 70s?
Okay,
Thank you.
Jim, for
Thank you
you,
for.
Steph Curry, Jason Tatum. Okay, we're in that
Hey,
category.
I appreciate you throwing us back to the 90s. I'll get my kids on the line. All right, thank you, Superintendent Jones. Anything further on the information and recognition items?
Is that it, Cami? Was it just those three?
Yeah, that's it, sir.
Okay, yeah, so sir, that pending your direction, that concludes item number 1.
All right, thank you much. We'll move on to action item number 2, paid professional hours for educators.
I think that's Ben, sir.
Okay,
If I may.
Ben, take it away.
Thank you, Chair. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. Good to be with you this morning. R277629 is a follow-up to a new legislative allotment that was made during the session to provide funding for professional hours for educators. I believe the number mentioned was at 64 million that was allocated for this program. So essentially what we have in the rule is just a few things to let LEAs understand how this will be distributed and how the funds can be used. The rule clarifies when the funds will be, what the funds will be based on, and then gives some details about how the program can be used. The other thing I just wanted to point out for you, there are several references in the rule to section 53F7202. That's the statute was given that number in the bill, but it's actually been changed to 203. So if you pulled up the link there and were confused, it's because the section is now actually 53F7203, and I'll make that change non-substantively, assuming this goes forward. You don't need to do anything else with that, but I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that the legislature changed that number from the time it was in the bill to the time it was put on the books. Staff is happy to answer any questions you have about the program.
Thank you. I have one question which I raised with Deputy Superintendent Jones, but I'll hold it if anybody else has questions before that. So the bill authorizes use of funds for a number of things to help teachers develop, including things that increase their knowledge in academic subject matter expertise, plan and prepare daily lessons, understanding how students learn, et cetera, et cetera. And my question was, in the rule line 20, saying that an LEA may only use program funds for educator salary or benefits. Deputy Jones clarified that should encompass all the things that are contemplated in the statute, all of these professional learning opportunities. My question was, would some of these be outside payments to a professional learning provider, vendor, that kind of thing? Would the rule encompass that opportunity, or was there any chance that the limit to salary and benefits would preclude expenditure on something that was contemplated by the statute?
Looks like Director Uri has his hand raised, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. Sorry, I couldn't see on the, oh, there you are.
Yeah, School Finance Director Sam Uri and Deputy Superintendent Jones can probably answer this as well, but the legislative intent, as we understand it, is for educators themselves to be compensated, And so this would not allow for any outside professional development contractors, for example, to be paid with these funds. Again, additionally, the legislative intent is that this is a collaborative process with the educator's supervisor or principal to push forward initiatives for the educator's personal professional development, and it shouldn't be mandated by a school-wide or LEA-wide type of a systematic type thing. It should be driven by the educator and approved by the educator's principal. Don't know if that answers the question, Chair Moss, but
it does, and I guess the answer there is that this would. I'm just trying to make sure I understand the lay of the land of where this could be spent. It is intended for professional hours, certainly by an educator. Let me just take I had a text on this one. I see Scott, Deputy Jones's hand up, and then a couple of questions from committee members. Let's turn to that while I check my source. Yeah, Scott.
Yeah, and so I apologize. We were texting. If maybe I misunderstood, but the key, I think we need to key in on line 20. An LEA may only use program funds for educator salary and benefits. So the context of the question I thought was, hey, can an educator attend professional development as part of their hours, right, and get paid for doing that? The answer is yes, but we can't pay, the LEA cannot pay a vendor, providing professional development with this money.
Gotcha.
Sam said that, right? So I apologize if I misunderstood your question, but that is, we really have to key in on line 20 there, that, depending on what the principal and the educator, agree to, and if they agree that, that educator wants to use his or her hours to attend a particular professional development course, then absolutely, if they use the codes that we've provided for this particular program, they could pay that educator for those hours that he or she spends in that professional development course, or service provided by an outside vendor. But no, this money is not intended to pay vendors to provide professional development to our educators, sir. So.
Got it. And that's exactly the line that I was keying in on, is line 20,
okay.
and just
Yes,
matching it up with the statute, section 203, where it talks about LEA using funding to provide paid professional hours that, and then it encompasses a lot of things. And the distinction you've made, I understand. So thank you. The lack of clarity was on me, not you. So thank you. That distinction, I think, is what's important there. So they would pay for the hours that the educator spends, allowing them therefore to go out to more professional development opportunities, or to spend it in the school on PLC activities, that kind of thing. And my understanding is all that would be encompassed, but they would then need to get approval to pay the vendor for that PD. Would that now normally come from the district, or could the school approve that? Do you know? This is, I see Vice Chair Norton nodding. You had both, or Scott, anybody want to answer that? I guess the intent here is to provide a broad latitude for teachers to use this money, and hopefully if they're getting paid to take something, they will also get approval for the cost of that professional learning opportunity. I guess any concern there about the ability to get it paid for, and whether that was intended that this would not cover that?
So I'll go this for, I think the key takeaway from this, sir, the key intent is that relationship between the principal of the school and the educator, and what he or she or they agree to, right, as far as what constitutes the use of these hours, by that particular educator. So your question about in the past, is that a district thing or thing? Yeah, I think, and that's why, and I would really like to hear from Vice Chair Norton on her experience with this as well, or anyone's, but for this specific purpose, there was really a lot of emphasis on, that relationship between or, in a charter school would be a director, right? And that educator coming up with how what's in the best interest of the educator for the hours that he or she has, for the.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. And that makes sense. I just want to make sure we're not restraining any latitude from the statute, so that they get approval, but they can't pay for the thing that's being approved by the teacher and the principal. They both feel this is in their best interest to go, seek this particular learning opportunity. Or are we restricting the ability to use that funding to actually pay for that as well as pay for the hours? So, yeah, Vice Chair Norton, I know you had a separate question, but feel free to weigh in on this one too.
Well, my separate one was just that I was ready to make a motion, but to answer Scott's question, yes, I went in with my principal. I sat down. I said, I would like to spend time coordinating and cultivating additional science curriculum, materials, etc. for 2 of my days. I'd like to do one in social studies for a different day. And then there is a district kickoff activity for getting to know my English language new standards for my grade level. And I'm going to use that for my 4th day. So we sat down, I had that plan. I went in, I talked to my principal about it. He agreed that those would be the kind of goals that would be appropriate in this situation. And so he signed off that would be okay. I then kind of gave him a calendar of when those would be taking place. And then when I get finished, I will follow up with a summary of my activities. And at that time, I will be paid for those 4 days, hopefully.
Thank you. And I guess if I could ask you or others a follow-up, if those are external opportunities that do require payment externally to a vendor, does the principal typically have the ability to approve that payment, or does that have to go to the district? My understanding is it might be both.
I'm not exactly sure, and we can, those that are in the realm understand this better. I know that I was asked if I was getting credit for this, that would not, there were some stipulations when I went to outside vendor things that if I was, and I think if I was getting paid for it, or if I was getting credit for it, or, those types of things, that would not apply to this, but I can't remember the exact questions. I just know I answered no to all of them. So that was approved, but the actual details probably would best come from someone else.
Chair,
Well,
if
thank
we
you.
have,
I can address this before board meeting. I don't want to hold us up, but I did have a concern just to make sure that if that decision is made and the hours are going to be paid, that they're not, precluded from whatever cost might be associated with getting that. So let me put my question back, and Member Hart and Member Hutchings, and then Chair Huntsman. Oh, no, not Chair Huntsman. Member Hart, Member Hutchings.
if the principal has access to funds, then they pay for it. If they don't have access to funds, then the educator has a decision to make whether they want to pay for it themselves. We use the same system. I have probably 25 of those to approve. They tell me what they're going to do. I read it, I sign off. They can then start documenting the hours. My concern is if there's districts in which that's not happening. So I certainly want to make sure that we're all responding to our constituents if there's any concerns about how this works. What I understood it to be is compensation for things that teachers would have normally done outside of hours, working hours, and recognition that there are many hours that aren't paid. And this was a way to compensate them for it. The principal, in my view, doesn't necessarily have to and shouldn't be guiding it as much as ensuring that the activities are within the scope of the rules. So it's not necessarily, I don't judge the activities. I mean, some teachers say they want to work on scope and sequence of courses. They want to update their Canvas. They want to attend a class that's free. It's somebody's designing a new course. It's a wide variety of activities. Yeah, I'm not judging those activities necessarily. I'm just making sure they're within the scope of the rule. I don't have any questions, but I was also going to make a motion, but I'll wait till after Stacy gets her questions in.
Yeah, let's see a couple. I see Chair Member Hutchings and Chair Huntsman both have hands up.
Yep.
I just in relation, I just wanted to add to what Molly said, because there's a process and we're going through it as school leaders to sit down and approve these plans. And I think it's a great opportunity to have those discussions with teachers of how they would use this money and how it would benefit them. I think, and from what Jim, you're saying, I think we do need to be careful that schools typically do have a process of how they make decisions and they have a budget and a process of how they make decisions of what additional funds are spent on outside professional development. And I think it's important that we make sure that, from your questions, Jim, I'm not sure if you're asking, are the schools now bound to pay for this outside professional development? If I think schools need to be able to follow their the process and that they already have in place to make those determinations separate from this plan, because this plan we'll pay you for the time, but are we going to pay for this professional development that's outside? We need to be able to follow the process that's already been established for that, because it could be a $50, fee, or it could be travel and, all kinds of, it could get really pricey, professional development, and we can't bind the schools to that because we have our budgets and processes outside of this. Does that, hopefully that's clear, that we can continue to use our established processes for that part of the decision.
Yeah, thank you. And I have no question that that's the appropriate process, is to keep doing it as it's been done. The only question is, if that process is followed and we now have additional money to pay for the hours that it takes, could the principal also say, well, like this looks like something you want to do, it's approved, we're going to pay for the hours. Could they also choose to use some of this money to cover the cost of that opportunity? That's my only question. And I don't know from the statutory intent, but I know what the rule says. So, Chair Huntsman? I think it's only hours, so I'm just asking to make sure. I don't think there's any intent to depart from practice of approving PL cost. It's a question of how you use this additional funds to help teachers expand those opportunities. Chair Huntsman, I can't hear you. Are you?
Yeah,
There we go.
Yeah, I'm in. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I'm really confused how we're getting in this conversation, because the bill was really quite specific to, and 20, there's a lot in here, but 20 and 21 is line 20 and 21, just very specific to what the rule of intent was. It was, and this is a question for staff on this rule. I think it's very simple to roll out, but it's very specific. It can only be used for basically their salary and benefits. So it goes to the payroll side of it, and it can't be used for indirect costs. So it goes directly to the teacher's salary, and in the process to get this, to have this extra compensation, schools already have a process to vet whatever training, extra things they've got going on. So my question, I guess, is to Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, based on this dialogue, is this ready to roll out? Because it seems simple to me and very specific, but based on the board, the committee's questions and comments, are we going to have confusion within our LEAs as this is rolling out? I guess that's a question, Chair Moss, that maybe directed through you to Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones.
Yeah, Deputy Jones, I don't think there's any vagueness in the rule. It clearly says just professional hours. So my only question is whether that restriction is consistent with the statute, and I appreciate the feedback. I mean, statute is titled professional hours, so I just had a very discrete question. When you approve payment for additional hours, can you use this funding to also pay for the cost of that opportunity? And I think we've heard that. I think the rule's ready to roll. But Deputy Jones, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah. So to answer Chair Huntsman's question, yes, we're ready to go. The rule is that we were very specific with line 20 and 21. In fact, we debated on whether or not even to put 21 in line 21 on the indirect cost, but felt it's a value add. To Chair Huntsman's point, there's certainly no lack of clarity here. And that essentially is that this money can only be used, is only intended to be used to pay salaries and benefits of educators who participate in professional development or use their hours as agreed to, as we've already discussed. So we're ready to roll with the rule, and I'm quite confident that there will be no confusion on the parts of LEAs on how to code this. If Finance Committee members will please recall, I did send you all an email demonstrating that we had communicated with the LEAs on the exact program coding for this funding. So I don't anticipate any misunderstandings out there whatsoever once you release this rule. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Jones. Yeah, I think the rule is very clear. That was my only question. Was there an opportunity to use it elsewhere? But I don't see anything in the statute otherwise. Sam, have a hand up.
If that question's clear, I want to call attention to line 16 and clarification that we sent out to the field yesterday. There's been a lot of LEA requests for getting the funds earlier than November, with the understanding, or the caveat that if the educator isn't employed at the November 15th data collection date, they would not be included in the allocations. But we recommended an 80% distribution of the estimated funds to the LEAs in July, so that they can fund those educators that are doing a lot of summer work and be able to pay them as soon as the LEA feels as they have completed their hours. And then we would do the remaining 20% and a true up after receiving the November 15th counts. So I wanted to give you that opportunity to look at those two lines for the distribution.
Got it. Thank you. Chair Huntsman?
Yes, another question for Mr. Samieri here. If this comes out of committee unanimously, was there any benefit that this should be put on is this time sensitive, to be put like on a consent on our June 30th meeting?
Well, one suggestion I might have would be to just strike let's see. So if we struck the language that says on line 16 through a one-time distribution, just strike that language, and the final version would say the superintendent shall distribute program funds to LEAs annually based on November 15th licensing information. I don't think it necessarily needs to state in the rule that it's an 80% in July and a 20% true up in November or December, depending on when we get that data. Maybe Ben Rasmussen can chime in on.
So my question, Chair, if I could, my question is this time sensitive so that they can gear up and plan? Or are we good to take its natural course and put it in August? That's my question.
May I respond to that?
Please.
So we had written this rule anticipating that it would go through the August board meeting. I think that the staff can act based on what the board is pushing, and so we don't see any need to to rush this along.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, I think we're ready for a motion.
Hey. I move that the committee approve R277-629 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Right, unless there's any further discussion of the motion.
Would that be with the language stricken that Sam asked for?
Sorry, do we need a formal amendment for that then?
Sir, it's Scott,
I think,
please.
oh,
Yes.
Well, no, I'm sorry, Ben. I didn't mean to cut. Yeah, we really should take that language out with Sam's recommendation, because as Sam articulated, and no, we don't need to rush the rule, but the way it reads right now is we're making one lump sum payment. But now we're going to do the 80-20 split. So we need to take that one-time language out of there, please, sir.
if
All right,
Member
yes,
Norton just
let's
adds-
pull up the language then, and if I could maybe defer to Ben to help
I
us
was just gonna
craft the
say,
right.
if Member Norton just wants to add to her motion, striking through a one-time distribution on line 16, I think that would take care of it.
Okay. Do you want to go back up to the? Oh, wait a minute. I got it right here. Come on, pull up, pull up. Here we go. Okay, I move that the committee approve R277-621 draft 1 on first reading and with the omission, or is this draft 2 now?
Just say on first reading, striking through a one-time distribution on line 16.
Okay,
Yeah.
on first reading and striking through the one-time distribution on line 16 and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Did that do it?
Any discussion?
Yes.
Thank you, Ben. All right, with that amendment, committee members, please vote. Let's see, I didn't see Vice Chair Norton. It might have, there we go. All right, that is unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is action item again, number 2.3, Education Regulatory Sandbox.
This is Jeff,
Um,
sir. Jeff.
This is Jeff.
Yes, sir.
Hello, everyone.
Take it away. Thank you, Jeff.
I will do my best to keep this entertaining and engaging as always. Jeff Van Holten, Policy Advisor for the State Board of Education. Happy Friday. This is R277-919. This is a new rule that is in response to Senate Bill 191. Senate Bill 191 is a regulatory sandbox bill by Senator Fillmore. This was the bill that allows a school to apply to their LEA with an innovation plan. And if it gets approved, the innovation plan can then be funded. They can then apply to the board and have the innovation plan funded with 35% of their restricted funds. So this is not the Representative Welton bill that was the teacher classroom innovation where the teacher applies to the LEA and can get up to $5,000. So both innovation rules, but different programs. And you passed the innovation, the classroom innovation rule yesterday in full board. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on which one we're talking about first. So with this bill, the board was tasked with making rules on a couple of things. First, the board was asked to make rules on evaluating the innovation plan. So this is a really interesting position for the board to be in that the innovation plan is made by the school, the LEA governing authority, which is defined in the code is the LEA district board, or if you're a charter, it's actually your authorizer. It is not your governing board that would approve your plan as your innovation plan as a school. If it is approved, the board, just to keep it in mind, the board is not involved in that process at all. You have no say in the approval of these plans. The bill did also state that the plans can seek waiver of board rules, and it said the board shall waive the rules that are requested by the school if the LEA's approving authority approves the plan. So it's kind of this interesting dynamic where you are not allowed necessarily to inhibit the waiver of your own rules, with exceptions. The bill does highlight a couple of probably 4 or 5 areas or criteria in which you could block a waiver if you felt like it was harming the health and safety of students, if it was violating state or federal law. Very typical and what you would expect to see types of areas where you'd be able to step in and prevent the waiver if you felt like it was, creating some kind of negative impact. But otherwise, the waiver is required to be allowed. So this really, where you come in as a board, is it does require that once it's all approved, it's the board's job to monitor the success of the plan. And you have the power to terminate the plan if you feel like the success, the progress is not happening. So what you see in this first part in 919-3 is that whole process, how you would reach the part where you would monitor what you're monitoring, what is success, what is progress, having that all agreed upon up front. And whenever you see the word the superintendent here, which typically means staff, in a board rule, this is going to be sitting with you lead, with Mikkel Withers. So I've worked with him a little bit on this rule as well to make sure that he's set up in a position where he and his team can monitor this. We tried to keep this portion of the rule a little more deferential to what the school and the LEA approving authority comes up with. Mostly because, as you can imagine, you could have 100 different schools with completely unique and different innovation plans, and that would be very difficult for the ULEAD staff to then create some kind of baseline progress monitoring for all 100 when they're very case specific. So what was determined here is that the LEA and the school, which they're already required in the bill, will need to agree upon what are the performance metrics, what is the data that is being collected, and what is success. We've added here in the rule an additional piece. You can kind of see up on line 40, I mentioned benchmark and the timeline for benchmarks. So these plans can be anywhere from 1 to 3 years, up to the school and the LEA approving authority on what their timeline is. So we wanted to make sure that they do have progress benchmarks that are kind of built into their plan so that Mikkel's team knows upfront the data, what is success, and by what timeline they're hoping the LEA and the school to be achieving certain things. That will make his job a lot easier as he's monitoring a whole host of very different potential innovations that are out there. So that's the big component there. And then we did factor in, what if there is not success? What if we're not seeing progress? Then what? You as the board have the ability to terminate the plan, but we wanted to make sure that we at least gave the school and the LEA approving authority the opportunity to remediate the issue first. So they'd be kind of put on, think of this as a tomato, my own way of saying a corrective action plan, so that they have time to remediate the issues that are inhibiting their progress or success toward what the innovation is supposed to be achieving. And after they have not remediated, if they have not, I should say, then Mikkel team would bring it to the board and present the information, and it would be up to the board to take action as a full board on whether or not to terminate the innovation plan of the school. So that's kind of where we go with that portion of it. And then you can see down, starting on line 97, and thank you, Cami, you're doing a great job scrolling. Down, starting on line 97, there is also the option, once they have an approved innovation plan, they, the school and the local approving authority, can seek budgetary flexibility. This is at 35% of restricted funds that can be used to fund the innovation plan. So we put in here how that application process will work. We tried to keep this a little high level, but essentially stating that you have the option. Now, keep in mind, this is optional. So if the LEA or the school's like, we can fund this ourselves, more power to them, and that's great. But they do have the ability to apply to you as the board to look at using 35% of the restricted funds. And we really wanted to stress in this portion of the rule that the programs that those restricted funds are coming from still need to be maintained. they still need to be achieving what they're supposed to be statutorily and by board rule achieving. And if the money gets taken away from those programs, partially taken away for this other innovation, and the program itself begins to suffer because the restricted funds are no longer there to help it be maintained, that could be cause for the board to revoke the flexibility. We wanted to make sure you had that authority, and that was baked into this rule, just so that you are aware that you would be able to terminate a plan and have those funds returned to the originating program if we saw some issues happening there. But just really wanted to make sure there were some protections in place for those originating programs, but otherwise, if there's additional funds and the programs can be maintained, the bill and this portion of the rule would allow that 35% to be applied to the innovation plan. I probably exhausted talking about this rule far more than I intended, but hopefully that answers all the details through what it is we're trying to achieve here with this rule and how it plays out with this new program. So I'll toss it back to you, Chair Moss, for any questions.
Thank you, and I appreciate that level of detail. I do have a couple of questions and amendments, but let me go to other board members first. I saw Vice Chair Norton and Member Hutchings.
First of all, I want to tip my hat to you, Mr. Van Holten, for an outstanding job with this. I was really excited when this passed through legislation because it's needed, and that we have some great minds in this state, and I think there's going to be some wonderful outcomes from this bill. But I could not figure out how on earth this was going to be monitored, and you have laid that out so smoothly, and I'm just so pleased with how that has turned out. I do have one question, and it's just my own lack of knowledge. I don't understand legalese quite as well as I should, but on line 62 and 63, could you just explain what that means to me?
Jeff, do you want to handle that one?
Yes, I just needed to quickly read it.
Sorry, Russia. Just authorizing.
And I guess maybe I could even simplify it down where it says needed to no longer be in remediation. That was my sticking point.
Yes, so the required corrections that would be needed to no longer be in the remediation process. So essentially, I probably used remediation too many times. But essentially, how long do you need to fix your problem? To fix why you are not progressing in the way that we expected you to. And I believe, can you scroll up a little bit, Cami? I just want to see what number 5 says. The notice of remediation shall include. Yeah. So when we put them on notice, like, hey, you're not progressing, we want to make sure we outline what do you need to do, in our opinion, to correct, and how long do we think you need to accomplish that. If there's an easier or better way to say that, I am more than happy to rewrite that to make sure it's a little more clear. But that's the intent of those 2 lines.
Okay, so can I just clarify what I think I heard you say?
Sure.
That you said that if a program goes on remediation or is having problems, and it is determined that they need to have a remediation plan, that they will get this notice, and that you will give them a statement of what needs to be changed, and that there's a timeline for that. In this case, it looks like it should not be shorter than 45 days. And correct. Then they go on and hopefully make those corrections. Is that what you're saying? Correct. Okay, Great plan. Awesome, thanks.
Member Hutchings.
Thank you. I'm excited about this too. I think this can lead to some really interesting ideas and opportunities to try out some new things in our schools that'll help a lot of different students. The question did occur to me though, as I was thinking about different schools that might be interested in applying for this. Do we define what constitutes an innovation in this? So, because I'll tell you just really quick why that occurred to me is, I think of charter schools, and most charter schools consider themselves innovative. and their charter is innovative, maybe compared to some of the more traditional models of schools. And so are they already qualified for this because what they are doing and have been chartered for is innovative, or do they have to do something even more innovative? That's kind of where my thinking is. My question is, does that make
Is
sense?
that a question for Jeff?
I'm happy to take it.
Please
So
do.
the bill itself does have a lot of definitions already laid out. It's a pretty prescriptive bill, which is why the rule itself you see is very targeted to different pieces of the program. But it does define, I can just quickly read it for you, an innovation education program means a program. So this is a type of innovation that's being kind of thought through by Senator Fillmore in this bill, means a program of research-based innovations in a public school, including innovations in, and then he lists 8 different things: school staffing, curriculum and assessment, class scheduling, use of financial and other resources, faculty recruitment, employment, employee evaluations, or compensation. And I do want to point out that the word, let's see, it does say, actually it does not say including, so it is technically by read of statute, that's an exhaustive list. I thought it said including, which meant it would be suggestive, but I mean, it does cover a lot of elements of what a school, different parts of school operations, but that's kind of where he went with it. I don't know if that helps at all, but that is his specific list that he put in the bill.
Okay, so then my question is, and I'm not saying I think it's a bad thing or that it shouldn't happen, but a school that already has fits this definition of doing things that are innovative could take this to their school board or their charter authorizer and say, hey, we're already doing this. Here is our plan. Now can we use this these restricted funds to add to that plan?
That would definitely be allowed under the statute.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. Any other, again, I have a couple of questions and thoughts and a couple amendments, but anybody else? So let me just ask and propose a couple of things. I think so much of what we do, and especially in this space, is about the balance between autonomy and accountability. This is right at the intersection of that. And so I appreciate what we're trying to do here is comply with statutory intent, empower folks at the local level to, go through a pretty deliberate process. You got to get approval from teachers, the principal, the local board, and then it comes up to us. And so I just want to make sure with all those guardrails already in place that we don't go beyond statutory intent. And I don't think this really does, except with a couple of points where I wanted to address and maybe amend. One of them was on line 62 and 63. The bill itself, says that the minimum time frame for measuring progress with the plan, and they have to define how they're going to measure that, give a methodology. This is all in the statute. The minimum period is a year, the maximum is 3 years. And the idea there, of course, is that it's difficult to measure improvement in education. We all know that there's so many moving pieces and parts that it's very tough to say, well, gee, look at that. 60 days later, we're all better, and it must have been X, Y, or Z. That's a difficult analysis. It's something that I know ULEAD is working on. But in this case, I think perhaps that 45 days for, if they do fall within remediation, which means that they're not measuring up to the standards they and their local board set, and that's by statute up to them to figure out and then come up to us. I worry that 45 days is a very short, and I would assume that would probably not be used, but I worry when we set rules that allows kind of the lower end of that band. And it feels to me like 45 days is too short a time when you're trying to make progress and measure it to pull through remediation. So I'm curious what others might think, but given that the time frame generally is, a year to 3 years, I'm not sure exactly what a school could do in 45 days to get on track. Presumably they've been trying, they've been working, and it didn't quite measure up. So my thought would be something more like 180 days. That's on the lower end of the full 1 year, but it would allow them to take a look, assess, and say, well, we've got to do something different, and have time to actually work on that and then measure it. There's both components to that, right? If you find yourself, and we're familiar with this in turnaround, of course, when we have schools in turnaround, and they typically have, that 2-3 year period, you do need time, I think, to do both parts. First, to make the additional effort, and second, to measure it. So I'd be curious to hear what others think before I make a formal motion. I feel like 180 days would be a better lower end to preserve their ability to get in there and do what they need to do. So I guess I open that to thoughts, and if there aren't any, I'll just make an amendment proposition and we can discuss it then. I don't see any hands up. So let me just make that formal amendment proposal that we would change on line 63, 45 days to 180 days. And I've spoken to the motion. Any other committee member thoughts on that? Too short, too long? Member Hart?
I concur. I struggled with that too. It so depends on what needs to be remediated. I mean, if it's a financial, if you're not, I don't know, if you're struggling to keep your books, then you need to get that straight in 45 days. If you have a systemic challenge that involves staffing or some other glitch, then yeah, that takes longer. I do wonder, I mean, it does say not shorter than 45 days, but there is no protection in there if it is something that is going to require shifting around of staff and change, going through if you're going to change something, you have to go through your parent groups, your SEC, you have to build consensus, and you have to, change takes time, and buy-in certainly takes longer than 45 days. So I concur. I'm very concerned in general about where this puts a school that's trying to do this. So you get you get your LEA on board and you're working there, but then you've got the state board that can determine a need for remediation, and there's a real tension there, and that's I agree with Kristen. Jeff, you did a remarkable job on it. I just have that concern, and I don't know how to write that into policy. I wonder if Mikkel can give us some insight.
I see Mikkel's hand up. Director Withers, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Moss. I appreciate the opportunity to share just a couple of insights and observations. I know some of you are aware that when I served as a superintendent, we transitioned one traditional school to a charter. We converted a school to a charter. We helped a partner school become a state charter, and we developed a charter from the ground up. So I believe the state board has done a wonderful job over time of trying to remove barriers, but it hasn't been clear how to initiate local innovations at a school level. So like you, the excitement of what potentially could come is there. But weighing in on this specific time frame, I am imagining as you go through the language here, and again, Jeff, what a wonderful job of providing some flexibility to deal with unique challenges along the way, but providing the structure so that people can figure it out at the local level before they come and want to rearrange funding, which is, I think, the greatest liability that would need the most urgent response. However, that being said, I've seen well-intended programs and well-intended strategies that do not work in the best interest of kids. And you want to be able to mitigate the wrong directions as quick as you can, but would absolutely agree with your current conversation that the things you seem to be imagining and suggesting that would need to be adjusted. So you have this great plan, you've argued your case, you have local board approval to try a unique approach with kids, and it doesn't seem to be going the way you want. But you have some reasons why you think you can adjust that and continue to fine tune it. Yeah, it could be much longer than 180 days to continue fine tuning that. But if the wheels have come off, to take 45 days away from the learning life of kids is a long time. So I think you could make an argument that the no less than amount could even be shorter than 45 days in some circumstances. So it is about people being reasonable, looking at evidence, and taking the time necessary to focus on the needs of kids.
Thank you, Director Withers. Vice Chair Norton.
Yes, I want to add on to that because we saw what the loss of learning has done to our students when they were put in a innovative arena and left school on March 13th. And that would have been about 10 weeks of school. But, we're still feeling the horrible implications of that. And that was a necessity. So that's why I can't go with 2 or 3 years to have it be a lab for, let's see if this works with our students learning. That's an awful long time. So I think that I would rather err on the side of too short of time than too much time. I guess we just have to let our boards that are making these decisions have some latitude there. But I think we have to be very careful when we come to the students learning, just like the director just said.
Thank you. Any other comments to this particular amendment? And I appreciate the input. I think part of this, in my view, is recognizing the multiple guardrails that are already in place at the local level. And I think this is intended to shift some of that oversight to that level so that we are not micromanaging what constitutes success. We set those bars, we set our standards. I don't know that there's anything short of a budget problem that you can frankly fix in the way of student performance in 45 days. So I just worry that that sets a possibility that's impossible and could set up a school to be, pulled from their plan when they're still trying very hard to do it. I will point out that some of the budget corrections, which I was going to address in a minute, are in a separate section, so that if you are having budgetary violations, I don't see this restricting you to waiting even 45 days. If you're, they're going to have to report those types of things, and that's always sort of a, we don't innovate in financial compliance. You got to follow the rules, and that's something that our division takes care of. So I think this is all about progress in student improvement, and keep in mind it is about improvement. And so if they're working towards their goals but they're not quite there yet, then they're going to come into review. But I think they need enough time to actually make that work, while other things that would be just sort of an immediate fire drill could already be dealt with. So I feel 180 days is necessary to implement what was intended here in that shift of responsibility locally. Any further comments to the amendment? All right, board members, please vote.
Oh, sorry.
There we go. All right, that is unanimous. Thank you very much. I have one, I think, perhaps just one other, but I don't want to occupy all the time here. Anybody else have thoughts or amendments? Let me go then to the flexibility of restricted funds subject, and this is in lines 106 to 109. Actually, just 106 to 107. And then there's a related one on 118 to 119. So this one, again, I think is the sensitive subject of, sort of who decides. And there are restricted programs. It was the considered judgment of the legislature that schools would have the ability in a limited basis after a number of guardrails, which again includes majority of teachers, principal, local board, to take a shot at reallocating some of that money to serve the interests of their local students. And I want to encourage that. I want to, let people know, I think I sort of shared this yesterday. I want us to be in the business of empowerment and not interfering with that unless it violates state law. And I guess what I'm concerned with in line C, we have a possible termination. This all comes from termination because we don't approve up front, as Jeff pointed out. We're not tasked with approving the plan. We're tasked with monitoring and potentially terminating the plan. But we have some items built in here, which I think are critical. If we are going to terminate, then on what basis, right? And so we have some criteria that are set out, which we could later use. And so one of these on the flexibility of funds is going to be a description of how the program supported by the restricted funds will remain in operation and will not be hindered by the budgetary flexibility. My only concern is in the word hindered, because I think necessarily money is allocated to support a particular program. And logically, if you pull from one program to another, there might be a decrease in that program. And that's a bit controversial to say, but I think it's the judgment of the legislature that some decisions can be made. And so I think, frankly, there could be some lessening of the effectiveness of one allocated program because the school has decided, with the approval of their board and their teachers and their principals, that they want to allocate elsewhere. And we do need to have the oversight of that. But I guess my thought is that we need to make sure this does not nullify the ability expressed in the statute. And I don't know if it's best to just pull that and move to strike it, or use the word, for example, unduly hindered by budgetary flexibility. I think it's important to stay within the statute, both because that's what we're operating with, and because if we encroach on the intent of the statute, it's likely to come back with in a different form. So before an informal amendment, I just wanted to throw that out there. Vice Chair Norton, you're on mute, sorry.
I'd like to hear from Director Van Houten on what the intent of that language was.
Sure. The intent on that language, there is a requirement at the end of the bill that maintenance of effort needs to be maintained, as you're legally required with federal funds. Although federal funds are not at play here, obviously, this is just restricted state funds. So there is a hope that maintenance of effort of these programs would still be maintained up to what the state code envisioned for these programs. Chair Moss is not wrong, though. I mean, if a school does choose to, I'm struggling to come up with a restricted fund that would make sense for this, but whatever the program is, program A, and say, we have program A, we get $5 million for it, probably an Alpine School District budget, but And we don't really have any students where this targeted program really impacts, or it's a very small subgroup of students, and we end up having 2.5 left over all the time because we're serving all the students that could be served. That would be a great program to pull some of the funds from, because now they can maintain the program and use the additional funding for this innovation. The idea here, I do want to highlight the budget flexibility portion of this program, and this plays into the answer to your question, Vice Chair Norton. This is the area where you do actually have proactive say. So the plan has been approved. The school and the local approving authority have come up with this great innovation. They have their plan. Now they want to fund it, and they have the option to apply to the board. So what you're seeing here on line 106 and 107 is what would be in the application. And you can see on line 112, the board would then look at the application and approve or deny it. So this is just the information you would have readily in front of you on how to inform you on how you would make the determination of approval or denial. So I really do like what Chair Moss said about unduly hinders. That's really where my mind was at, because you will have some programs that will shift a little in what they provide, and maybe you as a board are fine with that. And that's something that these applicants should have the opportunity to present to you without having it be a complete no. So I understand and empathize with what Chair Moss is saying, because it's really going to be the call that you all make as a board when you approve or deny these applications for budgetary flexibility. My goal here with these lines is just making sure you have all the information you would need to make that decision. And if unduly hindered or taking it out altogether leaves you in a position where you feel like you have the information you would need as a board to make that choice, no dog in the fight on that for me. But I just wanted to make sure you all felt like you had what you needed to be empowered.
Thank you.
Any other comments? And I should, I guess while we're at it, I think this is related because it ties into what Jeff was describing. Now, I think the statutory intent, again, is to approve if it is not out of compliance with the statute and other areas of state law. And rather than have a sort of, in the law, we call it de novo, which is sort of the lower body made their decision. We take another fresh look at it and decide whether we like that decision. I do think this was intended to create, again, with the multiple guardrails below, the presumption that when it comes to us, it's met those standards. And unless it's outside of the statute or otherwise cuts into violation of state law, maintenance of effort type of things that Jeff described, that it should be approved. And so my second thought on an amendment would be that the line 112, the board shall approve an application for budgetary flexibility if it complies with state law, or unless it does not comply with state law, state budget law. So I'm thinking those two work together. Any thoughts on those? I guess why don't I just make a formal amendment? We could speak to the motion. I'm going outside Robert's rules here, but it's sometimes nice to hear input before you make a formal amendment. So why don't I do this? I would propose an amendment on line 107 that we insert the word unduly so that it says be unduly hindered by the budgetary flexibility as defined by state law. And in line 112, that it would be amended to read, the board shall approve an application for budgetary flexibility unless it is in violation of state law on funding and budgetary matters. And I don't know if we have anybody keeping track of this. I sort of dictate into the breeze. I apologize. I should ask if we're okay. Could we take a look at those two possible amendments?
Hey, Jim.
I'm sorry. Is that Member Hart?
Yes.
Sorry. Yes.
What is your definition of, or what is the difference between unduly and not unduly?
So that's why I said as defined by state law. And so
No.
it goes to Jeff's point. Good question. I guess my thought is if state law has a requirement that a certain program must be maintained in some fashion, then if we say it's not unduly restrained as defined by state law, but go ahead if you have better idea.
Well, no, I mean, I understand the state law part. I just I don't understand what the legal reason for putting unduly in. And my next question is, what about federal law?
And I think to Jeff's point, this is only state funds for which flexibility is being granted. So I don't think there is any possibility of diverting state funds from a restricted federal source. I'm sorry, just diverting federal funds. We could probably say that, no harm in making clear that, by the way, you can't do this as under federal law as well. To your point, I guess my thought on unduly is that it would be something inappropriate as defined by state law, as opposed to, you know, if taking away 35% or 12% from one stream means that you have slightly less available, then that could be defined as a hindrance. And clearly the law, the statute contemplates not a hindrance, but a reprioritization, which could be considered a hindrance if you took the wrong approach. So I'm just looking to build in the idea that, look, we are trusting schools and LEAs to make these decisions. That is going to be a matter of reprioritizing, but you can't violate state law in the process. If there are rules out there that say this has to be maintained to X level, if it was unduly as defined by state law and budgetary and finance matters, and then in line 112, we shall approve it unless it violates state law on budget and finance matters. I think those would build in the appropriate level of, or appropriate mix of oversight and flexibility that the statute anticipated.
So what you are saying is there's no other reason other than law that the board could approve or deny, could deny an application for budgetary flexibility.
It would be only if that cut into state law regarding the maintenance of those other programs from which the local LEA and school are seeking to reprioritize. That's my understanding of the intent of the law. So that would be the intent of the amendment. And I'm sorry, do we have that, how that looks up there? I want to make sure I got the.
Sure, I have my.
Is it possible to see that up on the screen and just see if I'm formulating that correctly?
I'm going to, oh, perfect. Cammy's on the ball. Can we just, side note, Cammy's great.
Thank you, Cammy.
And I did want to point out, Board Member Hart, to the federal law question, Senate Bill 191 actually ends the bill with a whole section of you have to maintain federal maintenance of effort. So a great example of this is SPED money. So if the state SPED money is brought off because it is restricted funds, so it could be used, but then causes you to violate federal maintenance of effort laws because you're funding stuff with state money, you can't do that.
Thanks for that clarification. I just want to make sure we're not putting our schools at any risk where they think they can do something that they can't do. And then later on, we have a federal problem.
Right.
Cool.
Could I, Jeff or Cammie, also just include that last clause in budget and funding matters on the amendment to line 107? That would be the intent there, that to the extent that state, oh, I'm sorry, no. It's already there. I'm just saying take that language from that section and add it to the bullet point above. So it would also say state law in budgeting and in budget and funding matters at the end of the amendment to line 107.
So do you want them in both 107 and 112 or just? Correct. Okay.
Yeah, the same language, that last clause in budget and funding matters would be in both 107 and 112. Oops, at the end instead of the middle. I guess that should be on instead of in, probably on both of those. That's probably me mumbling. So unduly hindered as defined by state law on budget and funding matters. So to the extent that one program needs to have a floor and you're starting to cut into it, then that would be inappropriate. And when the application comes in, as long as it doesn't violate any of those, the equivalent of maintenance of effort. I know that's a federal term, but I think what Jeff brought up is the same idea. To the extent that state law requires some maintenance of effort of a particular program, they shouldn't be doing that. But otherwise, I think the statutory intent is for them to have that flexibility and use the local guardrails to ensure that. We're having pretty significant review by both a community council, teachers, principal, and a district board. And so the idea is, as long as they go through that process, run that gauntlet, they come up to us, we make sure they're not going to violate state law. If not, then the presumption is that we go forward. Member Hart?
No, sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay, any further questions? If not, I don't see any hands up. Members, please vote on that amendment. Should I read the whole amendment again? I probably should. The proposed amendment is on line 63, change 45 days to 180 days. I'm sorry, that was already done. The proposed amendment is on line 107, insert the word unduly hindered as defined by state law on budget and funding matters. And on line 12, amend to state the board shall approve an application for budgetary flexibility unless it is in violation of state law on budget and funding matters. Committee members, please vote. Let's see, I don't see Chair Huntsman. Chair Hunt, oh, you know what? He's off. He had a client engagement. So that is 4 votes yes, unanimous among those present. And the last one I have, unless there are others, it's the last one. It's very small, and I apologize to monopolize here, but a question on line 118, again, unless others have. So the board may terminate an innovation plan for violation of the approved budget, including A, the failure of any originating program from which restricted funds have been diverted. And I would suggest that the term failure also be linked to state law on budget and finance matters. That might be the intent, but I'm looking to Jeff for that. I think if, again, the word failure, what does that mean? Does it mean it dies? Does it mean that it's ceased to serve the function that somebody might have expected? Or is it failure as defined by state law in a manner that's somewhat similar to maintenance of effort? So would it be appropriate there to insert the same language, the failure of an originating program from which, as defined by state law on budget and finance matters? I guess that's a thought before I go forward, but Jeff, any thought there? Is that sort of consistent with the intent? I see a nod, so let me just propose that amendment. So at the end of line A, we would insert as defined by state law on budget and finance matters. Unless there are questions. Oh, sorry, Member Hart.
I understand as defined by state law, but why on budget and finance matters? What about failure on some other type of audit that's required by state law? I agree with the first part. I'm questioning the second part. It doesn't need to just be budget and finance. It could be something else.
Good point. Yeah, I'm looking to just link it to state law. Where this is a budgetary item, so that's sort of where my head went. But certainly, if there's other terms of state law that say, look, you have to keep X and you've dropped below X. So maybe, yeah, I guess we haven't formally put up the amendment, but if we did, that's a friendly amendment to say as defined by state law.
I just think, yeah.
Or did you have an alternative? Go ahead.
No, I think that's all encompassing and doesn't unduly narrow it.
Yeah, I had the same question that Molly had. I feel better about this. Just as
any other questions or comments from board members? Okay, so the proposed amendment is on line 18, insert as defined by state law. There are no further, oh, at the end, thank you. All right. No other questions or comments? Board members, please vote. And that is unanimous. Chair Huntsman is absent for, I know he had a work matter. Okay, well, that covers for me. Thank you for your patience and walking through those. Any other board member questions or comments? If not, I think we're ready for a motion. Oh, Member Hart.
No, I was going to make a motion if you'll
Great, thank
scroll
you.
down, please. I move that the committee approve our 277-919 draft 1 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Thank you. Any discussion of the motion? If not, committee members, please vote. And that is also unanimous. Thank you very much. All right. I think we are on to our next one. And thank you again, Jeff, for working through those, all our staff. Again, I think we're all pretty excited about this opportunity. So looking forward to seeing what schools do with this autonomy. Next item, let's see, is another action item. This is our approval of board discretionary funds for data research. I think Deputy Jones is running this one, and we've got a special visitor from Standards and Assessment, Board Member Earl. So Scott, I'll turn it to you.
Yes, sir. So yes, and Board Member Earl's with us. This is a request for use of your discretionary funds. Well, actually, we're requesting that the Finance Committee recommend to the full board to utilize remaining balances in your discretionary fund account for this purpose. And you can see the recommended action there, that the Finance Committee recommends that the Utah State Board of Education approves using the remaining, and we're exact on the numbers, of land exchange funds. Land exchange funds can be used for research and development. The remaining balance of your federal mineral lease funds and a portion of the remaining balance of state funds for a total of $195,600 for the purpose of entering into a sole source agreement with BYU to conduct research on data sharing between the state education agency, USBE office, LEAs, vendors, and other agencies for the purpose of reporting on the specific data being shared, the reasons for the data being shared, and the use of the data being shared. I won't read the full background, but from a staff perspective, I do recommend that the Finance Committee members recommend the use of these funds for this purpose to the board for your August meeting. We did also, just for some additional information, Board Member Earl, myself, Aaron Bruff, our data and statistics coordinator, and Director Soleil all met. So we were ensuring that we weren't, by this process here, we weren't duplicating efforts on privacy acts or processes that, our data privacy chief or director Soleil is doing as well. So Aaron and David are vetted on this as well from their particular perspectives, and we're here and available along with Board Member Earl to answer any questions any of the Finance Committee members may have. So with that, sir, back to you for any questions or concerns on the part of Finance Committee members.
Thank you. And I see a hand from Vice Chair Norton. Member Earl, did you want to speak before we go into questions and comments? You're on mute. Jenny, you're muted. Jenny, can you hear us, Member Earl? She's not looking at the screen. As soon as I can get her attention. Vice Chair Norton, do you want to go ahead with your question? I'm going to text Member Earl.
I did.
Oh, somebody else already did?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, I did as well. So I think she got just caught up in a question in her other committee. So the timing.
Oh, you might be right. Okay.
Yeah. So I think she'll be with us here in just a second.
Got it. Okay. Vice Chair Norton. Oh, you're muted too. Everybody's so polite.
Go on off mute. Okay. My question's probably best directed to Aaron Brough. It appears that this basically is an outside vendor audit of our data privacy. And I'm just wondering if we've ever done such a study in the past, and if so, when was the most recent one?
Aaron Brough from Data and Statistics. Okay to answer that question?
Yeah, please.
So the last time we did an evaluation of an outside entity and their utilization of the data was it was about 4 years ago with Utah Educational Technology Network, so UETN, where we went in and evaluated the utilization and destruction of the data that they had. That didn't cost anything. We just went up in person, visited with them, saw the server files and watched them destroy it. So that's the last one we did. And it wasn't, it wasn't as extensive as what's being proposed.
Yeah, just letting you know I'm stepping in the other committee. So for a minute, don't get to.
Aaron, have we done one using instead of our people going into someplace like UTN? Have we ever done one where an outside vendor has come in and this isn't a vendor, but an outside entity come in and look through how our data is being used?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
I'm here. I don't know if anybody has questions for me. Good morning.
Thanks,
I didn't catch the first part of this, so you'll have to, I apologize. I'm trying to go in between here.
Woman with
Thank
many
you for
hats.
jumping back and forth. We have a hand up from Member Hutchings, but Deputy Jones explained the program and the background. Did you want to add anything before we turn back to member comments and questions?
Well, I'm not really sure what was said. Let me turn this off from the other committee for a minute, but just in meeting with staff, there's a couple things that and they've probably already articulated this, that we have some, where we're looking at the law and whether we are actually, this is our staff, whether we're actually doing what so whether we're posting on the website like we're supposed to do, and whether or not the actual contracts meet the requirements of the law. So that's front end. I see this as back end, where we're saying, okay, this is what you're supposed to be doing. Do these third-party providers actually do what they say they're doing? Does that make sense? Who is it that's getting the information? I don't know if I'm articulating this really well. Sorry, because we're back and forth here. It used to be that technology was for more of a consumer, like the consumer themselves were they were doing it to help consumers. Now it seems like there's more, we've moved into this realm when it comes to technology of more of a product, where people are products. So when it comes to children, it would be looking at those key questions as to whether or not they're fulfilling their contracts with the privacy, and also with making sure advertising, these type of things, exactly where that's going. And I don't think I articulated that real well, but that's some of the components of it. So it's not looking at the pedagogy, anything like that. It's just simply the questions have to do around the usage of the data and whether they're fulfilling on the back end what they said they're going to be doing.
Got it. Thank you. And we've heard from Deputy Jones and from Aaron Brough, so that completes the view. Member Hutchings had a question. I saw Deputy Jones, but the hand's down. So Member Hutchings.
Yeah, just wondering why for this we are looking at an outside entity to do this instead of our internal auditing process.
Is that for?
Would you like me to speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, Member Earl.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. You've got there's a research component to it. meaning that the availability of using some of our research schools in the state, those that can provide research, but also I think there's a uniqueness when you go outside that that also they have a different viewpoint, and some of these entities actually specialize in this this type of a work, so that they've already been engaged in, and specifically the entity that BYU is going to be working with has engaged in this type of process already with K-12 technologies. And so they're very familiar. It's kind of a unique process. And so that's one of the reasons why, if that makes sense. Specialized or specialty in this area.
All right, thank you, Member Earl. Any other comments or questions? And I'll just add that I looked at this and asked some of the same questions. It does seem like a really good opportunity. We have questions that come up quite frequently in different board agenda items, and this would seem to give us an overall visibility going broader, so that we have some good base understanding of that, and perhaps resolve some of the things that often come up kind of piecemeal. Chris, sorry, Vice Chair Norton. Oh, you're muted. You're still muted, sorry.
I keep sneezing, and so I mute myself, and then I'm not ready. I'm ready with a motion when you're ready.
Please do, unless I don't see any other hands. So yes, please do.
Okay, I move that the finance.
Whoa. Kristen,
Oh.
can I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
No,
How
good.
confident are we that this will be enough money to study this issue in its entirety? I wonder if, I know Mr. David, you're on, and you know how many entities this may or may not. How confident do you feel that this is enough money for this project, or do you see any other considerations that we need to think about and maybe specify? That's a very broad question, but I'd like to get some insight, if that's okay, Chair.
Please, yes.
Okay.
David, thank you. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. David Saleh, Chief Privacy Officer for USBE. That is a really challenging question to answer. I would say a lot of it is going to depend on the exact scope of which ones we look at. I think, if we just think back to what internal audit recently did, looking at education service providers, they had to really narrow down who were the ones they wanted to look at. There are easily hundreds of these that could be within scope that are being used within schools. Some that are very small, receiving just a very minor amount of student information, maybe just like a first name and a school email address. Others, like our SISs that are extremely comprehensive in the information they receive. So I imagine that's going to have to be one of the first questions is, who do we want to look at exactly? Because there's a lot of fish we could be looking at. Some are larger, some are smaller than others. So without knowing that exactly, I look at this as more just the approval of the funds, at which point then we would we would start negotiating the sole source, and that would include more of those details. And I think maybe at that point we could start asking ourselves, if this much money, we'll be able to look at some of the bigger, more concerning vendors. Maybe we won't be able to look at absolutely everything. So that's kind of how I would look at it right now.
Okay, so you think this would be enough money to at least get started?
Definitely.
Okay.
And honestly, that would also be very telling to understand the problem better. Like we frankly, to the earlier question, and in terms of an external entity doing this kind of review, like Aaron mentioned earlier, we had like a small one where it was on site with UEN. We haven't undertaken anything like this. I think it is a huge gap because we have been very focused on the contractual requirements, making sure vendors are agreeing to those.
Right.
After that, we don't really know what we don't know.
Okay. for clarity, I want to make sure that we're putting enough resources towards this to get a actionable product. And I just wondered what, someone with more experience about the space, if you felt like this was enough or if we needed to look for more. So thank you.
Thank you, David. I see a couple of hands. Since member Earl's doing double time here, could I turn to her first? Did you have
I'll be quick. One of the entities that BYU is looking at working with actually has been in this space already. So when you ask about enough, they've been involved in this already. So they do have some information that they've been engaged with K-12, if that makes sense. So it's not like they're starting from scratch. That's one element. And then the other element is that, and working with our staff too, making sure we have the right questions moving forward. And then looking at this in phases, okay, midway next year or whatever, saying, okay, what are additional questions that need to be addressed? And then at that point, asking what needs to be done in order to do that. So I do see this as phasing, not necessarily as a comprehensive analysis. And I think that's the best way to proceed, to ask those questions. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Oh, it does. It leads to another question for Deputy Jones, if he's still on, or somebody that can answer this. When do we get the next infusion of money in that fund?
Yeah, Chair Moss.
Yes, Scott, please.
So Board Member Hart, that occurs by way of the year-end close process.
Oh,
so these balances right now are money that was in this current discretionary funds account. So this is money that's available right now. So the next iteration of money that goes into your discretionary funds report, or I'm sorry, discretionary funds account, is a result of year-end close activities. So typically we update your discretionary fund around your September board meeting, right?
Okay.
Because we do year-end close, and then we have the carry forward balances in these respective areas, and then that results in the balances. So these are balances that are already there. That are already
okay. Yeah, and my last question is, when would we? I need to just read it myself, but when would we expect this work to be done by? Do we have a projected end date from BYU? I can ask that later.
Anybody want to field that one? I know.
So sir, if I may, real quick.
Yes, please.
Just keep in mind what you're doing now is you're only, the action is you're recommending to the board to provide this funding so that we can, we have to have the funding first, right? We can't do it. Right. So then the agreement itself will come before the board, and it'll have that, it'll be in the consent calendar. If we can get to the August meeting, that's the intent, that you would see this agreement in the August meeting. If not, it'd be your September meeting, but that's where you'll see the, timeline and delivery and scope, and if that helps answer that question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kristen.
No, those were great questions. Those were helpful. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. So back to
the motion. I move that the Finance Committee recommends that the Utah State Board of Education approves using the remaining $93,888.57 of land exchange funds, $67,544.96 of federal mineral lease FML funds, and $34,166.47 of state funds, for a total of $195,600 for the purpose of entering into a sole source agreement with Brigham Young University to conduct research on data sharing between the State Education Agency, USBE office, LEAs, vendors, and other agencies for the purpose of reporting on the specific data being shared, the reasons for the data being shared, and the use of the data being shared.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair Norton. Any further comment or discussion to the motion? If not, board members, please vote. And that is unanimous with Chair Huntsman absent. Thank you. All right, thank you very much. Moving on, we've got, that concludes the action items. We've got 3 information items and 1 discussion item where I'm not sure we have anything. So next up is the review of USB student enrollment data elements. Who's driving that one?
Aaron is, sir, but if I could just, this is an information item. I mean, that's obvious, but this is a follow-up to a lot of concerns about, student coding and things. So, this is going to mean what you provided here by Aaron is a lot in the lines of orienting you towards, how students are coded, but it's going to have ramifications on future action items that you might have. So we really feel it's important. He needs about 45 minutes at least to get through this because it's that that inserted. So the last agenda item, we can do at a later date. We don't have to do that. So if we run into time, but I
apologize. I wasn't aware of the time constraints on this one.
Yeah, that's my fault, sir. But we'll, we needed, this was an item that was on last month, but we definitely need to cover it with you this month as an information item because it's going to have a lot of bearing on what we do in the future. So,
all right, let's roll it then. This is Aaron, did you say?
Yes.
Aaron, thank you. All right. Can you remind us on your title? I know what you do, but I'm terrible with titles. So just for the record.
Fine. Aaron Bruff, Data and Statistics Coordinator, and just talking to Cami or whoever. I can't share, so Cami's going to share the screen, I believe. We tested it, but I had to jump out. And anyway, long story. Okay. And I can speed up, I can slow down. Yes, it's 45 minutes, but we'll go at whatever speed that we can go at. So I'll go ahead and move to the next slide. And by the way, as we're moving,
just for Aaron, just before you start, we do have about 50 minutes. We are on 12:15 rather than 12 o'clock. So at Deputy Jones's discretion, it sounds like you have the floor for the full 45 if we need it. So yeah, feel free to give us the fire hose.
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of reviewing again, we're talking about the data systems, where they come from, how they're utilized, a little bit of the history behind it. So these first couple slides just kind of orient you to what was and how do we get to where we are right now. So the first part is just this is just kind of an overview. So let's pass this slide. Go to the next one because this is just kind of like a highlighting point. So the first one is just talking about what we call BUPass. BUPass stands for the Board of Education, and I forgot what Utah Performance Assessment System for Students. Basically, 2001, Congress passed the No Child Left Behind Act, which required states to do a number of accountability components. So it updated the whole system. At the same time, the state of Utah also had a number of assessment requirements. Back then, we had the criterion reference test, we had the direct writing test, the Utah Basic Skills Competency Test, a norm reference test, and the supplementary reading test. We needed a place for all this information to go and to join up. And so the creation or formation of BE, being the Board of Education UPass, was created database-wise. Go ahead and move to the next slide if you don't mind, Cami. So as we look at that, the BUPass data warehouse holds our enrollment records required to be submitted by the LEAs, again, historically 3 times a year via a flat file or a CSV file, which just basically meant that they had to send us all the information that was required to do all the accountability and the financial components. And then we also have the assessment records and the enrollment records needed to be joined for the calculations of the No Child Left Behind AYP and the UPass accountability systems. And back then it was the financial statistics sections and the IT team, again, like it just said, created this BUPass data warehouse. The first year we had data was in 2001, 2002. And basically this is our statewide longitudinal data system. So if you hear the word SLDS, we're not talking about a religion, of course, we're talking about this longitudinal data system, which can be broken into multiple components, but on the K-12 SLDS, this is typically what we refer to as just BU past this named database. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. And if I'm boring you with this too much detail, please let me know and I'll move a little bit faster. What happened then is we had to transform or update our system from that flat file submission to an XML submission, which basically meant no longer was it just, here's a file spec, meet it and load it, and we'll see if it will pass our validations, but we need to do a just-in-time or a daily submission. So in 2009, the development of the Utah e-transcripts and record exchange, known as UTREX, was the development process started, and that change required all the LEAs from a 3-time-a-year submission to a daily submission component, but there's still a 3-time-in-the-year data collection on those submissions. So we have the October 1, the December 1, and the end of year UTREX data submission, which we transform the data and store it in BU pass. This is kind of critical, again, information to know that where did our data come from? So if someone might ask a question, well, what is going on a certain day within the data submission that's happening? We can look at that inside of the actual day-to-day loads of UTREX. But when we do accountability, when we do financial reporting, when we do official documentation, official statistic reports, demographics and such, it is based upon these 3 snapshots. And we do extensive training with the LEAs to make sure that they hit those 3 days or those 3 snapshot collections, and that the data go through extensive review, preparation, checking, so on and so forth, so it is accurate. And then they also sign off that the information being submitted during these timeframes are accurate. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So this is just a quick demonstration of how many records are we talking about that we received back in 2001 when it was first set up. It was just a test case. We had 13,000 plus records in there. In 2002, the first year that this was up and running, you see we get up to 543 100,000 records. And you can see throughout the year, 10 years into it, we're up to 700,000. As of last end of year submission, 2021, we had 837 enrollment records. Now, that's not students. Obviously, that is enrollment records. Students who move from one LEA or from one school to another school they'll duplicate their enrollment record. And that's kind of important to understand that we're not tracking, this. We track students, but we also track where are they enrolled, what is that time frame behind it. And then as of December, when we did that last submission, you can see that number there. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So this right here, and the reason why I labeled my slide or my presentation 101, we understand that that's the basic introduction into a college course, but we have 102 as of right now student enrollment data elements inside of BU Pass. I know this is kind of small. I wasn't planning to take you deep into the database structure itself, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware of part of the complexity of the information that we have inside of the enrollment tables. So again, we have 102 elements just in student enrollment. There are hundreds of other tables that connect to this and other utilizations behind that. And it can get complex to track through and say, okay, what do you have where it's at and such? What kind of information does the state board house and maintain versus what does the LEAs have? So again, this is the enrollment record and the components behind it. So let's move to the next slide. And I'm happy to go back and talk about this. So understanding of the data elements we have, the easiest, when I say the easiest, it's still complicated, but the easiest approach to look at this information is to look at the Utrecht Data Clearinghouse file specification. In the past, the board has asked, hey, what data do we collect? And we've given them this document. This is a 200 and about 27 page long document. That's a little intimidating to take a look at. Cami, if you don't mind real quick, would you click on that file specification link? That will pop open the window. This is found on our website. So, oh, sorry, yeah, 229, that's correct. This is sometimes difficult to read. It's not intended for everyone, though it is a public document. If you just slide down to the next page of the document, Cami, this is just to note that inside of there, these are the type of records that the LEAs are required to send to us on a daily basis. So we have the district record, we call that a D1, or school record, the SC, and then we have a number of student type records, S1s, S2, S3s, S4s, and such. And then we have the incident records inside of there. We have the transcript record. It's a lot of information. So sometimes it's like, well, how do I handle or read through this component? And Cami, if you would jump back to the PowerPoint, wherever it was. She has lots of slides open.
Sorry, I am not
No.
sure where it went. I wonder if it did it because, let me see if I can go back, if that's what it was.
It might have. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
So we were on page, go ahead, page 9. There we go. So for your information, when you look at the Utrecht file specification, every record type has 3 components on in that document. First, you have the CIF path map, XPath mapping. For the most part, general public, you don't need to worry about that. That's for the technical utilization of when the LEA's IT team need to map their information over, they use that. The second component inside of that document, or the second section when we're talking about it, for example, the S1 record, then kind of goes into the detailed field descriptions. So when I work with individuals who ask, well, I can't read this 229 page document, it's overwhelming. It's like, well, first off, no, you can skip the CIF XPath mapping, and you can also skip the student record error component where it goes into detail where USBE staff communicate with the LEA IT staff. These are the validations and the checks that we're going to be running on your data. It's quite technical. It's not designed for lay people. Lay people can obviously read through it if they like to, but the component is just that detailed field description. So if you want to go ahead and jump to the next slide, and just because of the time, I'm not planning to take you into the file specification. I did provide it a chunk of it, not the 229 pages of it, but I did provide a chunk of it for you to review within the backup. So if you had questions, you want to talk about how to look at that, I'm happy to take you into it and kind of show you that step by step. I don't know if that's something that the committee members want to look at or not. So I am leaving it up to you.
Request, I'll open that to requests, and I appreciate you kind of pausing to see where we want to go. Yeah, I think go ahead and proceed as planned, unless Member Hart was.
Well, I was just going to say it's a challenge for me to understand even at this level. You might lose me if you go too much deeper. Okay, so Cami, do you still have the Utrecht spec open right next to it? I won't. So let's go into here. Cami, I'm making Cami drive this. So can you zoom that so we can just see a full page? Okay, now I'm gonna have her scroll just a little bit. So we're gonna go to the S1. Actually, Cami, probably you see it says S1 starts on page 16. So if you could scroll down to 16, or yeah, there we go. So 16,
Go up just a little bit and you see the top of that one. No, you're in 26. It didn't jump to where we thought it would. Anyway, okay, scroll back up a little bit more. So for your benefit, just so you're aware of this, this is that path, that SIF pathway mapping. This stuff is way too technical. Let's go ahead and stop right there. We go. So the S1 record, so each one of those records that we receive, and again, the point of presenting this is obviously information. Is like, how do I read this? So the first step is, okay, you go to the page where the introduction of that information is, and it says, okay, hey, we're talking about the student record. And then it goes through this pathway mapping. Skip it. Unless you're in IT and you actually have to be writing the code to map these things, this is not important. So Cami, I want to have you scroll through it's called the SIF pathway mapping, and just start scrolling up multiple pages. So we're going to go through 102 elements fairly quickly. The red means these have been updated for the current year that we're working on for the IT folks to pay attention to. Stop right there. We go. So then it goes into this element where it says detailed field descriptions. This is then should be plain English, we hope. I mean, it's still a little technical, but now we're saying, okay, what are these fields? What is the elements that we're holding? So record ID is going to say the first 3 characters of the student record must always contain the record identifier S1. That's just a general, hey, that's what it is. Then it says, hey, you need your school number. You need your student number. It's required to submit it. You need the last name. You need the first name. And it's going to tell you within parentheses, is this something that we require or is it optional? So you can say down there, middle name, it's optional. An LEA can send it or not send it. If they do send it, we take it and store the information. Go ahead and keep scrolling just a little bit. So again, we talked about birth date. We said that's the birthday of the student. There's the business rules, the law requiring so on and so forth on the information that needs to be submitted along with it, the format and such. Go ahead, scroll a little bit more. So this is an example. This has been an interesting topic, obviously, of late, where we're talking about gender and the changes that are going on with this one. So for example, we've called it gender since 2001. And then we're updating it for next year to be sex, changing the label from gender to sex, and we're changing the codes out. Initially, about 1.5 years ago, the process was updating this component. We added in non-binary, preferred not to identify, transgender, and basically all of the letters through working with the board on this. We're changing that, and then just to align to say sex, and then it's going to say male for M, F for female, and any other letter of the alphabet that the LEAs can send in would just mean we'll code that as preferred not to identify. And this is an update that's going through. So this is an example of, as you see this information in the code, this is what we're sending out to our field. Now, again, this is last year's. It doesn't have the update that was just presented to the board, not to the board, to the LEA IT staff on April, nope, it was May 24th, I think, was the last day that we just did an update and submitted that information. So that's this document and how to read through it. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, then when I say to the bottom, keep going a little bit. Again, it's like 101 elements. Keep going a little bit faster. And then what will happen is she's scrolling through all this information. It's going to hit into another table component of error coding. So we're there. Nope, not quite. A little more. Sorry, I make you scroll so much. There we go. So the next section is called the S1 errors. This is, again, information that we send out to the LEAs to tell them exactly as they submit the data on the daily UTREC submission. You could get a type of error if they receive an error or a warning. An error, a fatal error would mean that student record will not come into our systems. Again, for the most part, unless you're interested in looking at all these, I would recommend that board members ignore it. But if you have someone asking you, what data do you have or what information is being gathered, you go into that section in between. Hopefully that is a good enough explanation of how to read this document. I know there's a lot of information in there. This is, again, it's the technical Bible. Hey, here's everything that we need to know. And again, it's always available for anyone to look at. Best way to read it, you don't have to read the 229 pages. You just go into the sections. And what I usually do is I typically hit Control F, type in what I'm searching for, drop to those pages, and read through that document and say, okay, this is the information I need. Are there any questions on the UTREC specification document?
Any questions, comments? I don't see any. I do understand, and I apologize. I thought we had a full 50. I think we probably have about 40 or 42. So if we could shoot for maybe 12:05, we still got plenty of time, but we do need to save about 8-10 minutes for Dale Frost. So thank you. Yeah, let's move ahead.
I'm trying to move as fast as I can.
You're doing great. Thank you. And I appreciate the deep dive, knowing that you're also there. If we don't, remember all this, which we won't, but this orients us, and I'm glad you're there as a resource if we have to come back to it.
Absolutely. So now we're going into membership calculation, which this is finance. This is the important thing to say. How do we calculate membership? How do we know an enrollment record is going to produce funding? And so out of those 102 elements, I've listed here the elements that are utilized that we look at. Again, it's the October, the December. Primarily, it's the end of year components that we look at. So we need to know the student ID. We need to know what year we're dealing with, obviously. We look at their district. We look at their school ID. We look at their grade level. And then the number of membership days that are submitted. That's really critical, because what we don't have is the day-to-day interaction of the student information system. We don't have, I was absent this day, the beginning of an enrollment record, a date stamp on that. I have the end of the enrollment membership. And then I have which is then the membership days is the number of days between those two dates that the LEAs submit on us. And I'm just going to jump off just slightly. If someone says, how many absence does the student have? Well, we have a count of the absence. We don't have the day that they were absent. Hopefully that makes sense. So moving forward, the school of record is a really critical component, because that one right there is, for example, if you are running an SCOP program, they put school of record no. If they put no in there, that enrollment record does not generate any membership funding. It's removed from the calculation. So it has to be the school of record. It's a blank component inside of there. They also have to be of the correct resident status, meaning it's a Utah resident or a district resident in another state, or a Utah resident, but not in a district resident. Kind of complicated on that information, but as we have to have certain codes in there to say these generate membership days. We also look at the reported membership, the sum of all the membership given for a student. Then we have to look very carefully, especially for anyone from 9th grade up, or do they have an early grad flag? And that one's kind of important. I bring that before you as just something to keep in your mind as I take you into the membership calculation, because again, we have to look at early grads and then the schedule year type. Is this a year-round school or not? Because it has some different business rules on the number of membership days that are allowable. If you go ahead and move to the next
Can you just
slide.
remind us how the proration part works? I'm sorry if I missed it.
No, I haven't talked about it yet. So
okay, good.
Let's jump to the next slide. And
oh, I saw it. I saw it back on the last slide, but is this the same thing that was referenced there?
I'm going to talk about how proration works.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay.
Because that's a great question. To start off with, a student is allowed to 180 days. So if you're looking at this, and I apologize, this is code, but for me, that was the easiest way to display it because it's exact. But see down at the bottom, it says else 180. What that means is a student can have up to 180 days of membership. Proration is simply if a student is enrolled in 2 LEAs simultaneous throughout the year, and they both submit 180 days on that student, we will prorate it down to half, divide it according to the enrollment days on there. So as a full year, they're going to get 90. And so that student's enrollment record is up to 90 for that district, but they'll get a total of 180 by their enrollment records. That's how proration works. I think that makes sense to me.
I assume by 90, you're speaking hypothetically. If it was 80-20, then those would be the numbers. Okay.
Yeah, that's just a hypothetical.
Yeah, gotcha.
Exactly. But a student can earn more than 180, and this is how that happens. And the reason why this is allowed in there is because of different situations. So the first one, so if you're looking down this is what we call a case statement or a conditional construct, where it's like, hey, if this case is true, then do this, else move on down that list until you get to the correct statement. So if the student has an early graduation flag, then we up that membership allowable point to 999, which means the kid is taking extra courses. When I say kid, was used to change the word, the student is taking extra courses, and it allows for more membership to be generated for that student up to 999. I haven't seen a 999 in there, but we're just letting you know that that's allowable in there. And so there's multiple components as we go through and we calculate it. All right, how many memberships does this, days does this student have? If they're in a year-round school, which has schedule exception equals 1, that means then we allow for 220 days of membership. If the next one is like, if the LEA count, what that means is this student is enrolled in 4 different LEAs. We allow up to 205, which means they have some overlapping membership days between different places. It's that 180 plus 10 kind of process that we allow for. If it has a year-round schedule, if the student has a year-round schedule, you can see it's 205. If there are 2 LEA counts, we allow for 190. If there's 3 LEA counts, it's 200. Else, they get up to 180. And again, this is the allowable check, meaning allowable membership is this variable that we drop into our code. And then we go through and we calculate the student's enrollment record. And I'm using my hands on the screen, and I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I'm going to use these 2 numbers and I'm going to compare them against each other. If a student has, for example, 800 hours of membership and it comes next to an allowable, and allowable says you get 180, that's what they get. If they come at us with an enrollment record and there's only like 60, but it says allowable is 180, well, they're going to get 60 because that is, that's what their enrollment records were, that were submitted in by the LEA. So they were only enrolled for example, those 20 days or those 60 days or whatever it is. That allowable is that cap. And it's pretty critical that we watch that one and we have audits and checks on that very carefully, because what happens is then you just take all of the membership aggregated for each LEA that's allowable and you add that up. And then that then becomes your membership component or your calculations that flows into MSP that says, okay, here's how we're going to start counting and funding each of the LEA based upon, again, the membership of your students, time within your school. And as we do that calculation, then we say, okay, now what's the total max that the school gets? And then it goes through that whole automated process now of MSP. That then the finance team runs it and says, okay, here's the information. We have it. We had so many for, so many, you had 100 students. For example, in the LEA, they all had 180. We'd go through, do that calculations, do the simple math. MSP then calculates and then produces the amount that is financially. And as you know, there's multiple components inside of the financial side of the operation that says, okay, here's the money distribution that happens.
So Aaron, is the for MSP and WPU purposes, is the 180 a cap across the board, or are these other numbers caps for other alternate schedules, year round, that kind of stuff? I'm not quite sure where. So if 180 is meant everywhere, or?
Yeah, great question. The cap is dependent upon the situation.
Okay.
If I'm
the minimum,
180 is for I'm in one school district the entire year.
Okay. And if you're year round, I mean, I know that's a minimum, unless you have a waiver, but you do get credit for more enrollment if you have them more days of the year, and that goes into your WPU MSP.
Yes, up to what this code is telling you right here. These
numbers in front of us here, then, are those the caps for those alternate arrangements?
Yep.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Gotcha. So that's the last slide.
Okay.
Now I'm ready for any question, maybe.
I appreciate you taking a couple on the fly. Appreciate it. Any other questions or comments from board members, from committee members?
This is kind of a silly question, but how often are you having to change like a major, like the components that you listed, all those? How often do you end up having to change around the scheme of the data collection elements?
Sure. So great question. It depends, right? The majority of the items come in are flowing year to year. They don't change that much. If there's a new law saying you're now required to, like, here's an example. Hey, we're now going to get early literacy and numeracy. It's a new component on numeracy that needs to be submitted. Are you providing interventions for kids who are falling behind in numeracy? That's a new element, and so we have to add it. And so that it goes through the process. And the typical allowance is about a year and a half for all the LEAs to get up to date to add the new components. So let's say the board hypothetically says, we want to gather, I don't know, I'm going to go off something we just went through where we wanted to know, tell me the number of excused and unexcused days. So instead of just a whole number of how many absences, I want to know the number between the two. And so that process we go through, we evaluate it, and then we talk with the LEA partners about our proposal of what we think looks best. They give us the feedback, and then once we get that feedback and confirmation, we drop it into typically it's that next year.
Yeah.
COVID was an interesting 2 years where we had to do things pretty quickly, where it's like, hey, tell us, we need to know a little bit more. Are they are you in a hybrid setting? Are you remote? Are you in person 100% of the time? And frankly, that fast of a turnout we couldn't do. We could only say, just tell us what's happening at the school. We recognize it's too fast for systems to be updated to track that at a student level. So it depends how often we change it. Well, it gets reviewed and updated every single year. Some items are new, some items sometimes it's legislative requirement. So it's a great question.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. Any other board member, committee member questions? Well, thank you very much, Aaron. That is highly technical, but it's very good to get under the hood and figure out how all this is maintained. It goes into so many decisions that the board has to make. So appreciate the explanation, and we are glad you're there if we have questions. And I think that wraps it, unless we've got, unless you want to address anything else, Aaron.
All I would say is, for example, when you talk about data requests, if there are areas that you would like to discuss in further detail, you might want to understand better, for example, special ed and how that information flows or anything else, please let us know and we'll prepare for it and present it.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you. We've got 15 minutes left. I think Deborah has stepped in for Scott. And I think we're going to try to give a few minutes to Dale Frost. Let's see. I think that is item number 8, if I'm understanding. That sound right, Deborah?
It's actually item number 7. And we'd like to request that we move item 8 to the August board meeting to allow Dale the time he needs to give you the information you need on final estimates.
Gotcha. Okay. Do we need to move item 6 as well then? The financial audit report reviews?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll move that to August, and Dale's going to address number 7. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. No, I'm sorry. I'm trying to keep up, but thank you for, all right. Dale, are you with us on number 7?
I'm here, Chair Moss. Can you hear me?
Thank you, sir. Yeah, we're with you.
Yes. Hello, Finance Committee, Dale Frost, Minimum School Program Administrator. Really happy to be with you today. There's in the backups a full presentation. I'm just going to give you a few key highlights and answer your questions so we don't go over. Cami, can I share my screen? Am I able to do that? It looks like I can. Let me see.
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay. My computer.
I can pull it up too if you need me to, Dale.
My screen is not responding. I'm glad I can still hear you. Let's see. What did I do wrong? It's fun to have. Oh, there we go. Okay, let me put this in presentation mode. Chair Moss, can you see that now? Is it just showing my slides?
Not yet. Let's see.
Okay.
We don't have screen sharing yet.
A delay.
It's all right.
I apologize. Let me try that again.
Well, we're fine. There we go. Got it.
Technology is great when it works.
Yep.
All right. Let's see. Okay. Is that just showing my slides now?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Connor.
All right, I'm going to go quickly through a lot of these slides. And I think it's really great that we just went through the data side and how, because I'm going to talk to you on the funding side, how we take those complex processes that Aaron went through, and I'm very glad I don't have to deal directly with those processes. Aaron just gives me the final results on here are your ADM counts or whatever they are, and we use those in the formulas. I was going to introduce my new analyst, Quincy Bear, but he's actually on a plane to Oregon for a family wedding. And but one of these days I'll introduce you. He is a great help to me. So I was going to quickly go through, kind of give you a big picture of what the minimum school program entails, and then go through a few key highlights to the 22 final estimates that we just released. So there's, just about $6.7 billion in 22 of total public education funding. About 20% comes from local funds. This year, the federal funds, because of all the ESSER funds coming in, is a much bigger portion. It's usually more like 8 to 9%. This year, it's 16%. And the remainder comes from state funds. And I wanted to show you where on the uses side, the minimum school program accounts for about 80% of that funding. When you see USBE, we do not spend $1.3 billion here in the building. USBE is all the other programs, state programs and federal programs that flow through, most of them on a grant basis. And then there's a tiny bit of this for the school building program. I wanted to quickly show you the breakout of the minimum school program. There are 3 line items that make up the minimum school program. When we say MSP, that's what we mean. The basic school program, when you hear the term WPU, what that really means is the basic school program. Almost all of the funds in the basic school program are WPU driven. And when the WPU value increases, the dollars in those programs increase. The Related Basic School program is about 40 different programs that are statewide, but are not directly connected to the WPU. These are things from transportation to digital teaching and learning to Beverly Taylor Arts Learning Program. So most of your major budget requests will be within those 2 line items, the Related Basic School program or the basic school program. The voted and board local levy programs, you may have heard, districts talk about their guarantee funding. That's this 17%. And that's important because a key insight that I wanted to show you with the 22 final estimates relates to that. Most of the funds in the voted and board local levy programs are local levies. About 250 million of that is from state funds. So I wanted to quickly just give you a picture of what our work, when we say the MSP team, what do we really do? We basically take, the state level data when the state approves a budget, they have all of these dollar amounts by program, and we need to follow all the calculations and statute and rule to allocate these dollars to every LEA. And that's our main job, to calculate and oversee and distribute the funding in the MSP to each LEA. So this is just a picture of the 903,000 WPUs and how much each of the districts are getting. But it's not just districts, it's districts and charter schools. And our main kind of product that we give out to the field are these 3 reports. You'll hear terms called the legislative estimates or mid-year updates or final updates. Those are during the year, different, when we get different key data points, we update our calculations. And these are kind of the 3 big kind of points along each year when we give these amounts out to school districts and charter schools. So I was going to quickly We also break this out and provide these data not only on a program by program basis, but by LEA basis. I wanted to show you, if you wanted to see information about a specific LEA or program, here is the link. And you go to fiscal year reports and you'll see these reports that I'm talking about right now, and you can look up any of them. We haven't yet posted the final update. Those have been sent out this last month in May, and we'll be posting them very, very soon for 22. I'm going to just quickly skip to where the full graphic is showing here. This is kind of the MSP process and when these different updates occur, and what this is showing you. Let me see. I'm going to try to go a little more quickly. I apologize. It shows you a 2-year period from July 2021 through June 2023. And right now, we just finished over here on the right-hand side, the fiscal 22 final estimates. So I'll walk you through kind of with 23, how the process works. So we just went through a budget process. We had a legislative session, a budget was passed. We have to provide these legislative estimates, so by program, by LEA, but we don't have all these data. You know, Aaron went through all the processes to get the data. So, you know, and we get some of the data throughout the year. So we use projected ADM for next year, and actually for this year, projected enrollments and projected property taxes in many of our calculations. And then after the October 1 census that occurs, we go through a process with the mid-year updates and actually true up all of our calculations to actual ADM and actual enrollments. So you'll see us talking about the mid-year updates come November, December next year. And then what happens in the final estimates is that we true up to actual property tax collections. And that's what we just did for 22. So before I move on, any questions about the process? I know I just went through it very quickly, but hopefully this gives you a picture of kind of how that process flows.
Any hands? I think we're okay.
Okay, so moving on. So a couple key findings from the 22 final estimates that I wanted to show you all. And again, so going back to this, again, the final estimates really have to do with property taxes more than anything. We're not calculating new WPUs because we already have all the data we need for this year. So you'll see my findings really have to do with property tax collections. And so this slide here shows you the voting board local levy program and a breakout between the different state distributions. There are actually 3 different separate appropriation funding sources at the state level. But for the columns that say state funds, minimum basic growth, and local levy growth, those are all state funds. Local property taxes are under this column, local funds. And I just wanted to point out that what we found out is we had a projection on our property taxes, but our projections, we knew they were going to come in low, but they came in quite a bit lower than we expected. So we under projected by $60 million on the local side. And that means that there's a state savings because of that under projection. And so you'll see here that there is almost $40 million that from these two, the state funds, the local levy growth account, that are not allocated. And it's actually $38,790,000. And we're going to go through year-end closeout to make sure, but very likely we will have the opportunity to allocate according to the statute, how it, I didn't show the statute in this presentation, but we'll be able to increase the guarantee amount next fall to allocate these $38 million. And I know a lot of districts are interested in that. And we are waiting until the proper time to be able to do that. So that's one of the key findings. I just wanted to show you on the voting board local levy that property taxes came in higher than expected. And then in addition, the basic school program, there's a basic levy that every district has to charge its citizens. So the appropriate amount was 628 million. What actually came in at the end of the year was 634 million. So there was a surplus of $5.6 million, which will be a savings to the state. I also wanted to show you that Park City is in an interesting situation where their basic levy actually generates more than what their WPUs overall would generate. So they generate 35 million. Their WPUs are valued at 22 million. So the difference, that $13 million from the basic school program, Park City actually pays back to the state. So those are the main findings I wanted to show you from 22. We also just came out with 23 legislative estimates. And, I have some information on a program by program basis about the changes there, but I wasn't going to go too far into the 23 estimates, just to let you know that districts have those and that is helping them in their local budgeting processes. So other than that, that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Dale. We've got 2 minutes. Anybody got questions or comments? Well, I thank you again for the deep dive and the update. Deep, but a quick dive. So appreciate everybody walking through each of these items today. We did have a couple put off. I don't believe there's going to be a need, at least as I understand it, for a July meeting. I haven't confirmed that with Scott. The official calendar is we're not having one. We have no board meeting. And so unless there's an emergency request that we remote in and chat for some period in July, I think we'll be off until August. Any other questions, housekeeping items, comments from committee members while we're on? All right. Well, happy summer to everybody. We'll see everybody this afternoon, but to all of our finance staff, thank you. Appreciate all you do, and hope you get a little bit of downtime between now and August. So thanks all.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
We're adjourned.